How can you customize your PowerPoint workspace to make it easier to create and edit presentations? Hi, I'm Dawn with K-Squared Technologies. In this tech tip, we'll focus on working with the PowerPoint ruler, guidelines, and grid to simplify the layout and alignment of objects in your presentations. When you're preparing a presentation, make sure to turn on PowerPoint's helpful visual on-screen references. These include a horizontal and vertical ruler, a grid, and guidelines. Although you might not use them all at the same time, each of these options will help you align objects in your slides. And it's good to know that none of these tools will show up when your presentation is printed or displayed on screen. Number 1, the ruler. To turn on the ruler, as well as our other options, we start from the View tab. And here you can see in the Show group, ruler, grid lines, and guides. Now, although I could turn all of them on, it will be easier to see how each one of these may be helpful to you. And so let's start first with the ruler. Another way to enable or turn off the ruler is with the keyboard shortcut, and that is Shift-Alt-F9. And that becomes an easy toggle as well. You'll see that you have both a horizontal and vertical ruler. Mine are showing with inches as a unit of measurement. The measurements also correspond with the dimensions for the on-screen slide. In this case, it's a widescreen format. 0 is used for the center point. And notice on this ruler as I navigate that we can see a pretty subtle reference to tell us where we're positioned in our slide. This can be helpful when you want to be able to easily position different elements, whether it's text, a chart, table, different graphics, by simply being able to work with this ruler as your reference point. So for instance, for this table, if I want to be able to move it around, I can simply look for that four-headed arrow and then reference my ruler in terms of where I'd like to position it. And if I look over at the vertical ruler, maybe I want to bring this down to 1.5. Number 2, grid lines. This is also available under the View tab. The corresponding keyboard shortcut is Shift-F9. Now the grid lines are pretty subtle, so I'm going to zoom in so that you can see what those grid lines look like. And so notice this pattern here where we have various increments for our layout or for working with these different objects. The grid looks kind of like graph paper lines. It defaults to showing primary horizontal and vertical lines every inch with markers and dots every 1/12 of an inch. And that's something that we can certainly change. Now, you may have already used the grid without even realizing it because there's a feature called Snap Objects to Grid, and that's turned on even if the grid is not displayed. That means that when you move objects or placeholders of any kind, whether it's a title or an object, then it will kind of jump around and not necessarily be really smooth. You can see that we'll get just a little jerkiness in that, and that is the snap feature. So it's a lot easier to use when the grid is displayed. Let's zoom in on that again. As I'm moving this object, look for that pattern and it will actually jump to the next increment or over. That is the idea of Snap Objects to Grid. So there's a couple things that might be helpful. First of all, you might want to turn off that feature, and you might want to have smaller spacing or different spacing on the grid. So let's look at how to change that. We go once again back to the View tab and select this dialog launcher, this arrow that's in the corner for the grid settings. Here you'll see Snap Objects to Grid. Here I'll change it to 1/16. And this is another place for us to be able to turn on or off the display of the grid. Notice the guide settings. We'll look at guides next. This is one way to actually enable the drawing guides. But notice also display the smart guides when shapes are aligned. And that's something that we'll look at here next. So this could be set as the default. For right now, we'll simply choose OK. So your measurement choices might be different depending upon what unit of measurement you're working with. So now the grid might be a little bit more obvious here, and it's a little bit more subtle. But here we have those drawing guides, those alignment guides. So it can make it easier when we're trying to position various objects within a slide. And notice once again another guide to help us along. Number 3, guides. In this case, I've turned off the grid lines to make the guides a little bit more obvious and will enable them from the View tab. When the guides are turned on, notice that you have a vertical and a horizontal line that are displayed at those center points off the ruler. And so this is another reason why it's really helpful to have that ruler so that you can use it along with your guides and potentially with the grid as well. There's several different ways to work with the guides. One could simply be to move these. That is, by simply hovering over them, you can drag them left or right, and notice the measurement is very apparent, which is the other reason why the ruler is so helpful. But I'll return this back to the 0 position because sometimes it's helpful just to simply have additional guides as we're wanting to line up various objects. And so to do that, we'll move to one of these guides and then hold Control. And this will give us a copy. Let's say I want to move that at 2 inches, or somewhere close to 2 inches apparently. And now I have a reference for this. So I'll zoom in a little bit to make this a bit easier to see. And notice how I could work with these. Now, these are already aligned, and so it would be possible to select them all and move them at the same time. But the idea is that by selecting an object, then we can move it to that particular guide. And the nice thing about this is that this shows up in other slides as well. And so if you have a particular reference point that you want to use for other layout options, that can be helpful as well. So notice that those guides are displayed as well on this slide. In this case, we're a tech tip. You've seen how to simplify the layout and alignment of objects in your PowerPoint presentations by working with the PowerPoint ruler, guidelines, and grid options. How can we help you to be more productive? Please reach out to us for IT services and consulting to support you with Microsoft technologies. We look forward to working with you. Thanks for watching.